you've now seen people essentially lose their shirts because they've just totally missed the economics of what this is. It's definitely not a technology platform. It's definitely not asset light getting into cultivation. And because you've had so much, forward momentum and a lot of excitement around cannabis, you're seeing people who are typically just real estate investors who are now trying to build greenhouses having grown a crop, that are buying every single bell and whistle and light and fancy greenhouse to produce a crop that grows really well outside.
Farming flowers, chrysanthemums, cannabis, and California dreaming. Jake Brookes, Chief Operating Officer at Ladybug Farms in Monterey, California, learned about farming cannabis by growing flowers, chrysanthemums in fact. Originally from Yorkshire in the UK, he tells us more about his experience at the helm of a leading West Coast grow-up and what challenges and opportunities the sector faces in America and Europe.
Alrighty, so it's Dave Barton from the Thermidor and the Lobsterpot podcast. We're here with my colleague Jamie. Say hi, Jamie, just so everyone can see you.
Oh.
Alrighty, and our guest today is Jake Brookes from Ladybug Farms. Welcome, Jake. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why a nice guy from Sheffield, UK, and what you're doing in a cannabis farm in California. So tell us more. We're all ears.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for inviting me on here. It's a pleasure to speak to you both. It's not something I ever thought I would be doing years ago in Sheffield. That's for sure. I married into cannabis. It's something that I was doing and consuming and taking part in England quite a lot. But I married into cannabis. My father-in-law, my wife's father, was cultivating flowers and has grown floral crops for a few generations now. And I've sort of been transplanted into the business of growing flowers and growing a tremendous amount of cannabis. So it's definitely been an interesting few years since 2018, since California legalized on a Prop 64 basis, as it transitioned from medicinal to recreational. So it's been a wild few years, and it continues to still be a wild market in California. So a lot of lessons to learn for other markets in Europe, in England, and in a lot of markets around the world. It's sort of a kaleidoscope and a pressure cooker in California for genetics, for production, for sort of history and lineage of actual cannabis production and cannabis culture. A lot of it is started in California.
I mean, so whereabouts are you in California? Because are you just south of like the kind of Emerald Triangle? Because is it Monterey? Is that right? So that's pretty coastal, isn't it? Or
it's a ways away. It's probably about 4 or 5 hours away. We are just south of San Francisco, just north of Monterey. The Salinas Valley, or we are Watsonville particularly. Salinas, in terms of production of foods and production of different crops, is 70 to 80% of the US vegetable production comes from the Salinas Valley, or this sort of couple 100-mile radius from San Bernardino to Salinas. So there's a huge production area for a lot of different crops. We're in a berry region, so our next door neighbors is Driscoll's Berries, biggest berry grower in the world. Raspberries, strawberries. That's what sort of neighbors us in the fields around us, is all lettuce and berries. So it's a beautiful agricultural production region. We get a great ocean climate. We're just a couple miles off the ocean, so we get a nice coastal influence, and we have year-round good climate. So in terms of production, our area in California is pretty favorable.
Excellent. So are you a kind of an anomaly in terms of growing cannabis in the area, or are there other companies on other farms as well? There's Ladybug close to where you are.
Yeah, in terms of breaking down California into production regions, the largest production region is probably Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity counties, sort of tri-county area up north. That's where you've got a lot of history. You've got a lot of multi-generational growers who've been doing this for a long time. Pre-medicinal days, 70s, 80s.
Just back in that OG days.
Yeah, so there were a lot of these genetics, a lot of people first started growing outdoors, and were growing outdoors for a long time. When you get more down further to LA and those production regions, it's predominantly indoor cultivation, a lot more of an urban environment, and you do not have the ability to grow acres or grow a lot of plants outdoors through just legal reasons more than anything, and sort of persecution reasons. But where we are is we're probably the third largest production county, Monterey. But you've got Santa Barbara County, which is a huge wine region. You've got Sonoma County, which is a huge wine region. Monterey, Humboldt, Tri-County area, and then a little bit out in desert regions as well. But I like our climate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about the farm itself, and is it just cannabis? And you said you started out growing flowers, well, the farm did, and your father-in-law. So what has it kind of grown from in the time that you've been there too? I mean, how many square feet or square meters are we talking about right now? What does what does it look like?
We still have a small business, and we a few years ago, essentially, we started in a small space. Andy started in 10,000 square feet, about a quarter of an acre, doing a small medicinal program as we transitioned and just learning the genetics, learning production scheduling, learning what genetics did well in our climate. We were the first person locally to get our annual permits, and we have a large amount of space. In Monterey County, they had a ruling where you had to have existing greenhouse space to cultivate. When this region went through NAFTA in America, a lot of the cut flower growers and a lot of floral growers just went out of business because a lot of the business migrated down to Mexico and to over, South America, Colombia, cheaper production regions. So you have 9 to 10 million square feet of production space in Salinas and Watsonville alone. It's a lot of space to grow cannabis in a really good climate controlled environment, but a lot of these facilities are very, very old and needed a lot of work. So Andy was operating this facility since 1999. We started transitioning over to recreational in 2018. 2018, we started with just under 100,000 square feet of canopy space, so just under 3 acres. In terms of production, in terms of plants, that's about 6,000 plants per week in a 2-gallon container. The next phase of that was 200,000 square feet, which we transitioned to the back end of 2019, early 2020. That was again another just under 3 acres worth of canopy. We now sit at just over 500,000 square feet of canopy space, which is about 800,000 square feet of nursery space or greenhouse space. Our current production is just over 30,000 plants per week of cannabis. So it's a good amount, and it's definitely on an agricultural commercial level. We like genetics and we like production, and that's our focus as a business. But it's definitely been a wild ride to get there. It's definitely not been an easy journey. Definitely not been an easy one to navigate, and managing a lot of plants and a lot of people at this type of scale is it's good fun, but there's a good amount of stress in this market as well.
Is there for someone who isn't a grower, for someone listening to this or watching this who has no idea what a day-to-day kind of life looks like for someone working on a cannabis farm, what is a day-to-day life? And I'm sure there probably isn't a typical day, but what are some of the kind of more common things that you're kind of going about doing, or you're going to have to take care of, be it people or plants, or what goes into it? It's actually, in terms of crops, seeing different floral crops being grown, and like you go to like a B&Q or a Home Depot over here, let's say, you're going to see hundreds of different floral crops. And, we're used to growing, 5 to 10 crops all on different schedules. That's Andy's background. So when you've got 5 to 10 different schedules, and some crops that are 12-week crops, some crops that are 3-month crops, 4-month crops, some crops that are 1-year crops, you're having to manage a lot of different schedules. So very simple from a production standpoint, because, okay, this is our genetic menu. We have 15 production genetics. This is how many we're going to plant this week. This is how many we're going to move this week. This is essentially what our production schedule is going to be. So first off, it's starting with what are we going to do this week? What is the market demanding? What genetics are we excited about that we want to plant? Ensuring the team knows what we're planting on any given week is paramount, because in 16 weeks, that's what we're going to be harvesting. So we always start with nursery. In terms of a day-to-day, I'll get into the nursery. One of my colleagues, David, he's one of our foremen. We'll first thing is we'll walk the crop. It's vital. Farming is like there's nothing that replaces a farmer's footsteps. You got to see the crop. You got to know what's going on in the crop, and delegating and managing. It's not something that's best to be outsourced. If you have a problem, you need to see them yourself, and you need to know what they are and where they're coming from. And doing it at this type of size is critical, that you can trace back where you're getting problems from, because there's a lot in cannabis that can wreck you. A lot of pests, a lot of viruses, a lot of diseases.
In California at the minute, there's a hop virus, there's a hop latent virus. I don't know how prevalent it is in Europe, but because a lot of the genetics have come from similar sources, or essentially just someone's garage or someone's garage or someone's closet, they're not the cleanest sources of genetic material. And because they've been spread and given to nurseries, you've essentially seen a lot of problems been spread over the last few years. So, production at a commercial scale now is really trying to figure out what are the problems going to be in this industry? What are the viroid problems? What are the pathogen problems? And we're really trying to figure out the genetics and figure out production schedules to limit that. So assessing nursery management programs from IPM, from viroid management, pathogen management, and actual nursery production is sort of paramount. Next to that is then the processing, harvesting, and flowering. Once a plant is set and it's moved into flowering from nursery, and it's there for 7 weeks, it's pretty easy going. You'll set it on drip tape. We'll check in with irrigators. We're really seeing what it's doing throughout its life cycle. We're selecting a lot of different genetics, so really just seeing how the plant is moving along. The more challenging part for cannabis is harvesting and post-processing. A little bit different to flowers. You grow a flower for 8 weeks, so you grow a calancho, you take it, you pick it, you put it in a box, and you ship it to a supermarket. Cannabis is a little bit more tricky. So you got to harvest it, you got to maintain it, de-leaf it, ensure that it's prepared for dry and cure correctly. It dries and cures in a really nice, stable, controlled environment for 14 to 21 days is typically what we do. And essentially we do that in just a very large 10,000 square foot building that's just got dehumidifiers, cooling fans, and is essentially just like 10 freezer containers on steroids, basically. And because we're harvesting, 4 to 5 times a week, and we're harvesting every week of the year, we're able to turn the crop quite nicely. Yes, it's a wild process from start to finish. And then post-processing is really just creating products.
Absolutely. But again, so much goes into it, and I guess that affects the sort of price points and things like that. And I guess anyone coming into the sort of business from outside looking in and thinking, it's a new market, something to invest in. It's like tech, it's scalable. It's actually, you're dealing with the plant at the end of the day. That's what I'm hearing. And you can't lose sight of that. And the expertise needed to understand that from what I'm hearing from you is, there's no way of cutting corners here if you're going to do it properly.
Yeah. It's an interesting conversation because in California, for sure, because this is such a large marketplace, you've had a lot of people come into the industry and looking at the economics as though that you're going to get $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 a pound. And they've taken small numbers in a small limited market and expanded those numbers into a large economy. So you've now got a lot of different capital. You've got a lot of different real estate capital, investment capital, venture capital that's come into a market thinking there are these margins and thinking, hey, I'm going to grow 10,000 pounds. And if I can, and it's going for $2,000 a pound. So I've got now a $20 million business. This seems great. It seems incredible. It's not the case. Your average prices per pound of biomass in California right now for greenhouse grows about $250 to $300 per pound. So if you've come into the business thinking you've got a $20 million business or a $30 million business, I've got to put this amount into it. You've now seen people essentially lose their shirts because they've just totally missed the economics of what this is. It's definitely not a technology platform. It's definitely not asset light getting into cultivation. And because you've had so much, forward momentum and a lot of excitement around cannabis, you're seeing people who are typically just real estate investors who are now trying to build greenhouses having grown a crop that are buying every single bell and whistle and light and fancy greenhouse to produce a crop that grows really well outside, hiring consultants that have only ever grown indoors. So there's been definitely a large miscalculation of this is agriculture. This is something that's been going on for a while. And typically I would advise anybody in Europe or anybody else to look at crops that are similar to cannabis in terms of production schedule and requirements. From a basic perspective, you have an 8 to a 16 week crop. The crop needs nursery and vegetation, and then it also needs light manipulation and blackout infrastructure. Chrysanthemums was a crop that Andy's grown a lot and we still grow. But it's essentially the exact same thing as a cannabis plant. You've got a 16-week crop, it needs blackout, it needs nursery and propagation. And I think people miscalculated that. They looked to it as though it was easily scalable, this is what we need. We need the fanciest facility. We need the best lights. We need the best possible potential, and didn't really look at what it took to grow a crop. And I think that it's a lot of people have lost their shirts in the process there.
Yeah. So, I mean, slightly changing the subject, you mentioned there's a lot of difference in the strains. I mean, do different strains require a different kind of slightly different environment, a slightly different way of growing? And which ones are you really kind of excited about right now? What are the ones that you're seeing a lot of demand for, or the ones that you're kind of sort of interested in, experimenting with genetics and things like that?
Yeah, for us, this is the fun part because we have a good amount of space. I more try and view it as like families of terpenes. So if you've got, I mean, there's so many different strains you can do. If you can only grow 5 strains and that's what your space requires, then you're going to grow the best 5 strains, whatever is most popular in market. In California at the minute, the most popular varieties or families of strains are anything purple, anything gassy, or anything OG. That's for the wholesale market. For the retail market or the consumer packaged goods market, they like, much more of a bright floral or fruity terpene profile. The genetics I'm most excited about at the minute is a breeding project that we did with a breeder over here called Symbiotic Genetics. He's sort of a famed hash breeder. He's recently done a lot of mimosa crosses, and you're probably familiar with mimosa over in Europe as a huge genetic anyway. But papaya mimosa, Cushman's mimosa, there's a lot of really interesting fruit terpenes that are coming out this year. And then we have a whole host of other genetics as well. Old-fashioned lemon cider. We have somewhat of a breeding collaboration with a couple different breeders over here. For us, I try and think about families of different profiles. So we want something that is citrusy and is strong in limonene and strong in, if we have a genetic that's strong in pinene, we need something that's a little piney, or we need something that is gassy and it's very heavy gas. And you're going to look towards lineages that show those traits. And for us, then we're going to try and breeding characteristics that make production easier. So it starts with a terpene profile and a genetic lineage that has a great profile. If it smells, it sells. That's a sort of good way to think about weed. Yeah. Regardless of where you're growing it and at what scale, if it smells, it's going to sell. Then is the look of it. So if you've got a genetic that has a great terpene profile but does not grow well, doesn't yield a lot, might mold, or it might be botrytis. It might be a botrytis trap, but it's not resilient. We're going to try and look at that in a setting or in a challenging environment in a greenhouse. So we will, let's say, plant, and this is part of our program, we'll plant, let's say, 1,000 seeds or 1,000 different phenotypes of 10 genetics. We're trying to then select the best phenotype of whatever cross we think is going to be from a good family. Now, once we've selected a good cross from 1,000 plants, we've got the best 1 in 1,000 expression from that cross. It's got good characteristics from a yield perspective. It's resilient to botrytis. It's resilient to mold. We have a foggy climate by the ocean. It's nice because you never get extreme temperature fluctuations, but we're looking for things that yield heavily, have a good chemical productivity from terpenes and from cannabinoids, and then also are resilient to viruses, botrytis, and pests. Those are the sort of big 3 that we're looking for. And collaborating with breeders, breeding in-house, and just creating is really the fun part of this industry. Because a lot of the genetics that are popular or will be popular in England and the UK are not even there yet. They start here and it slowly moves east.
It kind of, I mean, I guess that's indicative of the kind of industry as a whole, really. It kind of feels like a little bit. I mean, again, I guess California itself, I mean, I guess, is it the oldest recreational market in the US or Colorado? I can't remember, but it's certainly out there. It had a medical program before Colorado was recreational, I think.
Yeah, California was the first medicinal program. Colorado was the first recreational, then Washington, then California. Mm-hmm. California's by far the largest market. What are the genetics that are popular in England at the minute? What are the can you choose? I mean, I speak to things like Stardog and Haze. But
I think unless you're probably speaking to someone who is passionate about it and not just dealing, for want of a better word, like if you're going to have that sort of kind of conversation about it. If you're talking to someone who's passionate about growing, then maybe they'll know. And I think outside of that, you'd struggle to find really a lot of knowledge, really it's just gaps, just big gaps, because it's not done legitimately. So people don't have the space to go, oh, we'll try this and we'll see if it works. You're just like, well, just get it on the street and it'll sell. You know, you can sell crap and it works. That's the.
I've heard that Stardog is big.
Yeah,
and again, yeah,
it's
and
so
things
weird
like mango kush and things like that. I mean, that's the street stuff. But again, I'm actually a medical cannabis patient, and in terms of what the prescription is kind of what's available, and what has been available most recently is, I think, something like Gorilla Glue number 4, which sounds like a really
yeah.
And
GG4 was big over here 3-4 years ago.
And
we used a lot of GG.
Okay, and Ghost Train Haze is the other one.
Okay, yep, that was big over here.
Okay, so yeah, we're seeing that pattern. It's kind of slowly, but again, I think the availability, and again, this is the paradox of the kind of UK market, is that we can grow here, but it has to be exported, and we have to import cannabis, or hemp or whatever and the medicinal. It comes from it's like a Canadian brand that comes from being grown in Germany or something that has to come to the UK.
Or one of the big Canadian guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that's the one. So it's an interesting route to market. So again, I don't know, like as Jenny was saying, the kind of knowledge of the strains is kind of like more of a casual lingo thing rather than a kind of, we actually understand the strains in not in the same detail that someone like yourself would, or, I mean, there are experts obviously, but your average person is not asking for those types of things because you take what you get, really.
Yeah. I think it's a huge area of potential for the UK, and it's something that I think about a lot. I've not been able to come back to England over the last few years, obviously, but with COVID and all this, all that crap, it's silly, really. How you can't go and see your family and travel. It's really weird. I think about it a lot, mainly because me being a younger man in England, if you got a bag of shake for £20, you'd be happy. I didn't know what it was. And we'd chip in, we'd go to a local place, which is basically just a couple containers at the back of the scrapyard and get what I had, but no choice.
Yeah.
Here it's almost like, you got like Willy Wonka chocolate factory because there's an abundance of choice and there's abundance of products. And, we just launched a 2-gram blunt product that is infused with live resin and diamonds. Like that to a UK market is like, what is it? So, transporting someone from Europe to this marketplace, it would almost look intimidating, but there needs to be so much more education.
I think that's exactly what it is. You couldn't even bring that here, could you? It wouldn't work as a product because it's such a massive step. Just
it would blow our minds in every single sense. Yeah,
exactly.
It would. Because I mean, I'm looking at things like what we do is we package. I'm just really looking at different products and different ways to, like we have, this is a pack of blunts, the different things that we're looking and we're specing for brands and for customers that are good marketing companies, good sales companies that have a great idea for a branded product, much like beer. Like, who is going to be the next Budweiser or who's going to be the next Angry Orchard of cannabis? We're sort of trying to work with those folks and work with those companies now in California to solidify them as a brand, a recreational brand. And how do you do that responsibly? How do you do that whilst also educating customers? Like that's just very far away from where England and Europe is right now, but it's coming. It's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Absolutely. And with Germany opening up, I think that's going to be everyone's. The speculation is Germany is the sort of tipping point because of how, just the sheer size of the potential market there. And, hopefully, and then I was reading something yesterday. It's like, will Luxembourg outdo Germany by legalizing it first? But then, Luxembourg's a country of about 5 people. Sorry, Luxembourg people. I've never been. But, by contrast, it's like, well, Germany, however many 100 million, I don't know, whatever. But again, if that precedent is set and there's other kind of decriminalization efforts happening in varying degrees across Europe, then you kind of have a similar situation, I guess, to the rest of the US. And that is, it depends where you land, how legal it is or whether it is even legal and whether it's medicinal, recreational, both, or if we catch you with CBD, we're going to throw you in the wagon type thing, which I guess the closer you get to the center of the US, it seems to be that's the more conservative the view on it, whereas you've got the East and the West Coast. And
100%.
There's a kind of domino effect.
Coast cities are legalizing quickly. They're the ones to first legalize. You got Massachusetts, Florida, New York, New Jersey just went legal. There'll be two huge markets. You know, Washington, Oregon, California, and now a large collective of states in America. It's coming now mainly because people are starting to see the economics of it. And we're starting to see mature markets like California that, if you look at it as just a marketplace, and California is the most, you know, in terms of like per capita usage, California must be up there as one of the top. But take that and compare it to the UK of like, you know, 60 plus million people. There's 40 plus million people here. This year will be a $5.5 billion market in California. The UK quite easily developed to be a $5 to $7 billion cannabis or cannabis-based product market. And in reality, I think until people see it up close, I think there's a lot of stigmas in the UK, and you've got a lot of different politics that make it tricky, and you've got, you know, the NHS and, you know, all that rollout to how you're going to do that from an insurance standpoint. But I think people will be surprised once this is recreational and once this is medicinally legal of like how much nothing will change. Except people are going to continue to do what they're already doing, but there's not going to be a stigma. There's going to be much better education. There's going to be a lot more jobs, and there's going to be a lot more economic impact to it. Because essentially you've got a multiple million, if not $1 billion+ economy that's already happening in England. It could be 5 times bigger if it's commercialized and regulated responsibly and done with safeguards and done with education. Well, if you don't do that, it's like there's not people driving high and like, you know, going out and shooting people over here because they've got weed. It's like, it's not the case. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite. Home values increase where dispensaries are located nearby. Opioid usage goes down in legal states. And there's just so much more economic opportunity. There's so much more opportunity to teach people about agriculture and growing things. And you know, England is a pretty interesting place for that, because you've got 60 million people in a very easily transportable, logistical, easily in country. Yeah. California is not logistically easy. So it's a huge potential. And it's one that is just, the longer they wait, the more of an opportunity they're missing, because Europe will catch up. Portugal's already there. And Portugal's going to eat everybody's lunch because they've got the best production climate. Portugal and Spain.
They do.
Well, I guess it's similar to California in many ways, isn't it?
It's kind of, arid.
Beautiful training climate.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, here's a question. Now, do you think part of the adoption, do you think the US, or in particular California, even with the kind of legacy market, had more of a kind of cannabis culture? It was more available. Do you think the US does generally than the UK? I mean, obviously,
100%.
Having grown up here and seen the two,
100%. Different world. It's like, you know, I pinch myself sometimes because I remember being like super happy in England, just with my buddies, and you know, a little bag of what I thought was like great at the time, like Budlets and Shake. Like you thought you got a great deal, and you got high, and you're able to, you know, watch a documentary and speak with your friends and listen to music and, you know, just relax. Oh, that's a great experience. But now when you can come into a store and you can learn about different terpene profiles and different cannabinoids, and, you know, hey, this cannabinoid and this terpene profile is probably going to make you feel this way, and try it and see how you feel. Like it enables this consumer experience to happen that is not available because there's no education. And because people are not educated about what this plant can do enough, and it's just not really widely exposed, or, you know, exposed to it really, there's a whole misunderstanding there. And this misunderstanding, I think, will be viewed in history as one of the greatest misunderstandings to ever take place. And now it's like, well, this is going to happen at some point. When is that going to happen? And it's really more a matter of if as when as to if.
Yeah, and with Sadiq Khan's recent visit and, you know, the drugs policy being reviewed again in the UK. I mean, again,
I heard he came to LA. I saw an article that he actually came to LA to see the LA cannabis market, and that's a huge urban environment, very different to London, but London's a huge cannabis market. London already is a huge cannabis market.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we're talking about, you know, legalization in England, federal legalization in the US, as a business that is involved in the cannabis industry, what would federal legalization change for your business, if anything, or the way that you operate? What would be if it was like that tomorrow, what would be the things that you could wake up and do differently, or would want to do differently?
access to resources and access to capital becomes a lot easier. At the minute, banking is still illegal. So we have a federally legal bank account, but it's federally legal. So you have different tax implications. Raising money, banking, just getting a traditional line of credit and, relatively decent interest rates is difficult. And to really grow businesses and have a scaled business, you need good financial operations and institutions to, for insurance, for HR, for everything else that goes along with it. You need to not know that, you've got these crazy tax implications that could potentially harm the long-term ability for you to operate a good business. The second to that is there's just a tremendous demand there. It's an insatiable demand that I don't think people quite grasp. We struggle to fill the demand in California. And you make that market 6 to 7 times as big and not a crazy amount of competitions in these other markets, not good climates to grow it. It changes our business pretty substantially. And that's what I think about it every day and I speak about it to a lot of people is it changes our business pretty fundamentally because we have to continue to create really good products for our customers and for our brands that we've established. But we now have to try and scale that and keep that consistent on a national level. And for us, I don't really think about how much we grow and money and the profit of it. It's more, can we create a good product and can somebody in Tennessee experience the same product as what we would experience in California? And if you can solve that problem, you'll do really well. So it's more of a scale issue, more of a capital resources issue. But it will be wild. It'll be an insatiable demand. It's already there.
Right. Yeah. But right now, for example, you can't take products across state lines or something like that. So someone from Ohio, I can't remember if Ohio is legal or not, but again, they have to get, they're arguably, maybe say Michigan, because I know it's, recreational's open up there. It's kind of like the quality of the cannabis they'll get there will be completely different to what they would get if they were in California, right? And again, I'm assuming you'd say there's no comparison, but from a bias perspective, but really is there? Can they grow it as well there, given the climate conditions in the Midwest and,
From a sun-grown perspective, like if you're buying like sun-grown or greenhouse-grown, like just sun-grown cannabis, if you're going indoor, like indoors the same in Oklahoma as it is in England. You're growing, then it's really it's like you're essentially creating a manufactured sterile environment that has ideal conditions. It's a controlled environmental agricultural product then. For this crop in particular, do I think it's a net benefit to this crop will be so widely consumed? I think the better way to look at it, like net, is how many resources worldwide will go into growing this plant indoors if that is the preferred consumption method. It's a lot of energy, it's a lot of gas, it's a lot of electricity, it's a lot of different things that will go into doing that. This plant grows really well outdoors. You would never think to grow wine indoors. So grow wine where it grows really well. It grows under natural sunlight. It's a better cost of production. It's a better economic to a customer. And a customer is actually going to get a better terpene profile and a better cannabinoid profile. That's how this plant has lived and has thrived for 30 years. It's grown in natural sunlight. We are controlling that through night deprivation so we can grow it year round, so it's fresh. And we're giving the crop a little bit of airflow, a little bit of heat to ensure that it can be grown relatively stable all year round. But it will make much more sense to grow it in certain regions, much like wine. California is a great wine region. New Zealand, Australia is a great wine region. Portugal, Spain are great wine regions. I really think it'll be similar to how those crops are grown.
Absolutely.
And it'll just make the most economic sense.
So do you think it will probably shake out that will naturally default to those kind of premium growing regions, for want of a better term, because, you can grow it indoors, but at the same time, if you want the good, I guess it's like, champagne or whatever, anyone can grow, sparkling wine, but if you want that quality, you want that cachet attached to it, that's, it's got to be done under certain conditions, hasn't it? And from that region. And do you think, is that kind of happens already in cannabis, would you say, with the whole Emerald Triangle? At least that's a perception. Do you feel like certain counties or certain places, equate to the perception at least? Is it a perception or is it the real deal? Do you think it really is, as you've kind of said, you get a better quality cannabis grown outdoors in a climate like yours in California?
I think you do. I really think you do. Like I've indoor is, and they've done studies on now. There's a good study from a guy up north, and he's like a famed cultivator. The guy's story is credible. If you want to look him up, he's John Casale from Huckleberry Hill Farms. Went to prison for cannabis. Got let out. Now he runs a really successful, smaller craft cannabis farm. And they're collaborating on studies that show that outdoor sun-grown cannabis has a more rich and deeper terpene profile than indoor-grown cannabis. You get a completely different and better spectrum of light from the sun than you could ever hope to recreate in an indoor environment. It's just really about cost. Like, in terms of like delivering a good quality product to somebody, it's like, I'm trying to think, it's not, you would never dream of paying like, more for a bottle of wine, even if it was not better, but just because it was grown indoors. Like you're essentially paying for heating bills, cost of production, and the build of the facility. That's what you're paying for. In terms of effects, if I were to give you 10 pre-rolls and say to you, hey Dave, hey Jamie, can you tell me which ones of these were grown indoor or outdoor or from a greenhouse? You're probably going to pick the greenhouse and outdoor ones because they've got a better flavor profile. But once they're all rolled up and consumed, like what is the difference? As long as the chemical productivity, as long as the terpene profile is there, you've essentially just got a cost factor. And some people really like smoking indoor because they believe it's more of a boutique, more of a niche product. But that's not my mindset anyway.
So it's kind of like the idea that there's so many, there's room for different types of cannabis, different price points, different, and depending on where it's grown and the cost of it, and the quality, there's still room to kind of have those different types of products. And, again, it's like, it's like wine, like you were saying, and things like that. You get the cheap stuff, you get the more expensive stuff, does it, unless you're attuned to it, do you necessarily know the difference? Maybe not. Does it get you drunk? Well, if you drink enough of it, absolutely. So it kind of depends what you're trying to get out of the experience. And if it's about, you want the quality, you want the whole experience, you want that richer terpene profile, then absolutely. And I think, again, when you're sort of talking about, people going to dispensaries and taking a bit more ownership of what they're looking for, and I feel like maybe in the US, there's already a culture of like, understand, people are more attuned to what they need, what their bodies need and things like that. Or there's a bit more of a focus on wellness. And that's starting to happen here. And it's kind of, as the kind of CBD market sort of proliferates a bit more, you're having people, taking it as wellness supplements and things like that. And just taking ownership of your own health, your own mental health, as much as anything else, and understanding what your body needs is becoming more culturally embedded, I think, over here. And I think, again, America is very much ahead of the curve in that perception, because I guess how commercial the healthcare market is traditionally anyway.
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect of that people are much more commercially able to get substances that you would not be able to get in England on a commercial. Just go to a doctor like, hey, I think I've got ADD. Can I have this one medication? Like, well, there's an incentive structure for a doctor to give you that because it makes a bit of money. There's then an interesting conversation there that is unfolding in the US at an incredible rate. And I think there's a lot of different pharmaceutical options that are not good. And is not, they're tested, but in a way that they deliver results that they want you to see. Cannabis is a huge antithesis and problem for that. And most of the lobbying in the US against cannabis comes from pharmaceutical lobbies. Because what's the point in paying for expensive opioids that just make you a zombie? You can have a little bit of weed and actually live your life, and it's much cheaper and it's much less profitable, that's for sure, because you can grow it at mass scale and it's an agricultural commodity. In England and in Europe, it's an interesting one because I see the CBD market starting to flourish there, and I see it starting to take shape. And we grow a little bit of hemp as well for CBD, smokable and extractable. The plants are exactly the same to grow. You've just got this different chemical component to them. And it's CBD if it's not got any THC in. Okay, but what about 1% THC? What happens to somebody then? Nothing really happens. And what about 2% THC? It's like, all right, well, now there's this arbitrary limit. It's almost like a speed limit. Well, if you go over 15% THC, you as a person are not responsible to deal with that, because we the government have said that you can't handle it and you can't hope to think about what that is, you can't comprehend the things that this substance is going to do to you. No, we should be promoting responsible consumption. We should be teaching people about THC. We grow a genetic now that's THCV. Well, that's going to be a new medicinal compound that is likely going to change medicine. It's likely going to change a lot of different things. But instead of sort of like stigmatizing and, just creating an unnecessary friction for a customer or a patient around what this plant is, should be enabling people to try different ratios and try what it is and say, hey, we're gonna try this and we're gonna do sample groups of like, hey, let's say we maybe have CBD products that can have 3 to 5% THC in them, and you've got to be done at a pharmacy, you've got to work with your doctor, or you've got to be over 21 to purchase it, to try it, and promote safe and responsible consumption. There's a number of ways you can try and introduce it, but I think just letting people make that determination, much like buying alcohol or buying anything, is going to promote responsible consumption and ultimately educate people about what they put inside their bodies.
Yeah.
Much better to smoke a joint, have some, have some Zoloft.
Yeah, massively. I think a lot of the arguments that you're kind of talking about when you're saying about educating and demystifying and giving people more information and encouraging responsible use, all the arguments against cannabis that exist, whether it's medicinal, whether it's recreational, are all arguments that exist in other things that we ignore, particularly in alcohol as the best example. And it's not quite the same thing, sure, but a lot of the outcomes and the dangers that people consider, they think, well, what if kids get a hold of it? Okay, well, not many do, but some do. But that happens with alcohol, as it could happen with any drug, as it could happen with anything. Are people going to, is someone going to go out and smoke and then get in a car and kill someone? I would suggest that someone probably will, because unfortunately people lack responsibility. But it's exactly the same with alcohol, which already has a legal framework, which makes it sellable, which makes it acceptable, which makes it part of our culture. And I think it's strange that we view it through the same lens and yet choose to ignore all the things that are basically the same as an existing framework that we have. When you spoke then about THC levels in the UK, when it comes to the hemp that we grow for CBD, it can't have a THC content above 0.2%. That was the arbitrary limit here, which is, it's so fractional at that point. What effect is it even going to have? It's going to be very, very negligible. I think it's a lot of the rules that are established by lawmakers as opposed to kind of well-informed scientists. People who don't have the information, either because it hasn't been presented to them or because they're blinkered and they're just trying to put, get a rule in place that kind of fits the bill or they think will and has massive implications down the line. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
You hit the nail on the head there, by the way. That was a good way to put it. Is you're essentially, what is happening now is you are having rules imposed upon you that are made and that are structured by people that do not have all the information in order to adequately propose those rules, by scientists that have been limited in their research of what will affect the general population. And because it's not widely used and it's not widely studied, well, you've now got problems, and it's now hard to introduce that to a market. I understand there's rules to protect people, but if little Janie gets into a mum's medicine cabinet and gets 5 antidepressants or painkillers, she's going to die. If little Jimmy gets into his dad's whiskey and drinks it, he's probably going to have stomach pumps. He might, he could be seriously ill. Little Todd who's eats an edible for whatever reason, you should not leave alcohol, any type of medication or pharmaceutical or weed out in front of children. I have 2 kids by the way as well. I'm interested to see this now because I am a father of 2 young children. I do think about this a lot. I think about how I'm going to explain this to my kids and do all this. But if you're acting responsible and you're a responsible person, then you should be able to have access to these things, and you should be able to promote responsible uses to your kids.
And it's normalizing it as well, and sort of saying there's a context, No, absolutely. I think there is a context around it. It's like, I've got 3 kids and, they know booze is a grown up thing. And it's kind of like, you have it in certain occasions, certain things you do it for. And it's like, they know it's a bit naughty or whatever, but again, why shouldn't it be that way with cannabis? Well, I talk to my kids about cannabis. Well, I talk to my older one about it and sort of try and, again, not sort of actively sort of promote, go out and use it, but it's kind of like understanding that this is a thing. In the same way, I wouldn't say actively go out and get drunk because you're 12, and that's completely wrong. But, there'll come a time, it's like, we just need to normalize it. Yeah, there's a time, there's a place, there's an occasion, and there's a purpose behind it. And let's have those conversations and try and normalize it as much as possible. And I think that is the thing. Now it's kind of like, it's still I think most people are very tolerant, there's like, if it's like, but it's still very hush, let's not talk about it. Or, like you say, go sneak around the back by the containers and have a smoke and a giggle, and it's, it's more acceptable. But again, it's still technically illegal. Well, not medical, but then there's no recourse really to sort of say, well, this is my medical cannabis. Is it, sir? Right, you're coming to the station with us. I've got, there's nothing. I mean, I could flash a CAN card or whatever, but like, what the hell's this?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But again,
it's a
there's so many different things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like my mama, like my grandma, like, the thought of her ever trying cannabis is just totally alien to her. It's not something that she's ever done or she's ever going to want to do. She has this connotation that if you do that, you're this type of person.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've never tried anything, I mean, I can say this, I've never tried like crack or I've never tried heroin. I mean, it seemed pretty bad. Like, if you've never tried something and there's large amounts of people that are doing this and are consuming this that seem okay, you should just have to question that. And, definitely rules need to expand. And I think now we have this sort of, everything is so global and you can see what other countries are doing and how they're operating, what's happening, and what is the sort of net positive to society. And I think the two big things you're going to see over the next 5-10 years have happened at breakneck speed since cannabis has started to be legalized is mushrooms, MDMA, ketamine, and cannabis. MDMA and ketamine in very controlled environments, the same with psilocybin, need to be somewhat regulated and somewhat prescribed responsibly. Cannabis is sort of like the easy, almost like a gateway to opening people's minds to, that psychedelics and psychotropics are different. That psychedelics are probably a better way for humans to interact with, to manage stress, to manage, mental illness. Like mental illness is like higher than it has ever been, across the world. And life has not gotten more difficult. If anything, it's the most easy it's ever been. And we definitely need good ways to treat those ailments now and good ways to manage that. And I think cannabis proposes a very, very good way to do that if it's done responsibly and if it's regulated properly.
I see. And I think here in the UK, we went to this event in Manchester, the MCCS is the, I want to say it right, Medical Cannabis Council Society. So anyway, they are, yes, but no, again, but they exist to kind of help guide the medical profession towards, response, what cannabis is and what the history. I mean, going to the event, and it was run by this guy called Professor Mike Barnes, who's, he was the guy that managed to get, the first NHS prescription for a kid with epilepsy over here, Alfie Dingley. And again, he's become since then like this sort of figurehead for kind of, I mean, again, he has no bias. He's a doctor. He's very keen to just kind of promote the benefits because he believes in the benefits. And again, but what they're doing through their advocacy work is educating doctors, and that part has to happen because again, the way the medical profession looks at cause and effect and cure and treatment and things like that is very much like one pill for one problem type thing. And that that has always been the way. Whereas when you start to talk about cannabis and cannabinoids and you can isolate certain things, but actually when they talk about the entourage effect, that has a better potential way of treating an ailment in stereo in that entourage effect than if you have something just individually. And that is a hard kind of concept culturally, I think, for a lot of medical professionals to come to terms with. And they are, but again, it's to do with the scheduling of the drug, the trials that are in place, but again, the irrefutable evidence, for certain conditions like epilepsy, like this 9-year-old boy, he hasn't had a fit for 2 years, and it's like, you can't ignore even circumstantial evidence like that. Something is happening that is very positive as the result of cannabis usage. And you go to school to learn medicine and you learn what is told to you and you learn what is in textbooks. And those are the tools that you have to make the best possible decisions. Now, imagine there's a whole different toolbox that has been researched in accordance with it. And actually you get better results. I mean,
Look up a company. I mean, they're an advocacy group in America called Normal, NORML.
Yes. I think
they continuously post some research of like, this is cannabis helps this. Cannabis compared to this different pharmaceutical or this different, methodology of treating something just is completely different and sees much better results. And because it's been stigmatized and because it's been sort of made illegal for all these years, it's caused a lot of good research and a lot of good products and good medicines to not be created because of that. And it's definitely not a good positive to society. And doctors, I think, are going to be the first ones now that they're seeing other countries adopt it to, how can I better treat my patients? How can I better treat these things? And the more they start talking to people in communities where cannabis is legalized, and even in America, doctors are not too quick to push cannabis because it's just not a good medicinal system. The American system doesn't really, work well with insurance companies and cannabis. I think England has a really neat opportunity to be a real leader in that, similar to what like Canada is. Canada's system is definitely not perfect, but I think the NHS will actually find its bill and its cost to be much cheaper for prescribing cannabis that can be grown much more economically than prescribing typical pharmaceutical drugs that cost much more to manufacture and are much harder to get to.
Arguments like that. We certainly reiterated that event we went to, talking about the cost of the NHS and how much the savings could be, regardless of expensive treatment, certainly just through, cannabis usage. And it's not just about, sitting people down and smoking. And that's the thing. It's the different forms it comes in. It's the oil, it's the Sativex, it's the tinctures, it's the different things and the broader benefits of doing those different, having those different methods of consumption and treatment. It's, it has to be taken seriously. That's the thing. And that, I think that is the stigma part of it as well, because a lot of people are still very much like, well, what are you going to do? Go and have a smoke and have a giggle. And how do you kind of equate that culturally to actually, this is pretty serious when it comes to medicating. It has tangible benefits that are life-changing in some cases. And I think that's a hard stigma for a lot of people to overcome. Again, not a doctor. I'm just, speculating from what I've heard and what I've seen. And
we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. And I think anybody who's tried cannabis or wants to be somewhat of an advocate for cannabis, like everybody sees it. It's a really clear path. Like, there's not a lot of crazily irresponsible people that smoke cannabis. There is definitely people who are irresponsible that also consume something. But just because you do something does not make you an irresponsible or different person. And I think once cannabis is just as acceptable as, smoking a joint or taking an edible and, drinking a glass of wine, once that's the case, then we'll be at a pretty good place. We're definitely not there yet. Even in California, where it's so open and it's, cannabis is, there's the phrase now, California sober, which basically means I don't drink, but I do smoke weed. Like, the culture is there in California more so than other places, but it needs to get to the cultural acceptance point where it's not a big thing to smoke a joint, or it's not a big thing to take an edible, or it's not a big thing to take a tincture or smoke a vape that's got cannabis in it. And aside from the medicinal benefits to it, you take alcohol, I suppose people can classify that as medicine of some sort, but it's actually breaking down your body pretty badly. Your liver's getting terribly wrecked whenever you drink. It's just dehydrating you. Like cannabis, like taken right, if you've not got an appetite, you want to sleep, it's good for recreational use and for medicinal use. I think recreational cannabis is a bit of a wonder. I'm happy we can grow the crop, and I'm happy we can sort of provide that to a lot of people. It definitely gives me some type of solace. And being a consumer, I like creating products that I would like to enjoy and smoke, and I think we do a good job at that. So,
absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of wrap up, so what's next for Ladybug Farms? What have you got any sort of strange you're working on, anything you're keen to try, any kind of new developments or new partners that you're sort of excited to sort of shout about?
Yeah,
we mention.
We have a THCV genetic coming with a breeding partner that we're working with. I think that will sort of be interesting to see that into market. I've tried it myself. It definitely gives you more alertness. It's almost like a natural, not a natural Adderall, but you get more focused. You're definitely not sleepy. There is definitely a high appetite suppressant nature to it, but there's a higher alertness to it when you smoke it. You do not feel high. You just feel somewhat concentrated, and you want to get into something, that's stuck in something, but you do not feel hungry. I'm excited to see that product go out. We're also doing work with a couple of other brands now on ratioed cannabinoids. So, not just high THC. There's definitely a focus in California at the minute for higher THC as possible, which is good. But if you just go on numbers, it's like, there's two cars. They're both $20. One of them goes 180 miles an hour. One of them goes 120 miles an hour. Well, people are always going to pick the one that's 180 miles an hour and it's the highest potency because they think it's better value for money. That's not the case. Like, that's a point of education that's pretty big over here now. Ratio cannabinoids, THC, CBD, how the products interact. That's going to be fun to watch in market. And then just different product form factors that can sort of slot in with customers. They can enjoy it in different forms. It's going to be neat. We just launched blunts. I do like a blunt every now and again. It's almost like a cigar type experience where you can have a good amount of it and you can share it with your friends. Like, I quite like that as a consumption method. It's going to be a little bit while before that comes to the UK, but that's a neat new product that we're looking at as well.
Okay, cool. Excellent, good stuff. And you're heading back over this way soon for finally after a couple of years, I remember you saying. So
about for a week in June 7th to 14th for a wedding. So
good stuff,
you can see what's going on.
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jake. It's been an education. So good luck, and I'm sure we'll speak again. But thanks for coming on, and we'll
thank you guys. Take it easy.